Have you ever just stopped and wondered how one single person, starting with almost nothing, can spark a spiritual movement that ends up spanning the entire globe? It's really an incredible story about vision, about persistence, and about a type of influence that just seems to defy time and distance. Okay, let's really get into this. So yeah, that's the big question we're tackling today. And this isn't just a history lesson, right? It's about trying to understand the mechanics of really profound leadership and how a message that's thousands of years old can hit so hard in our modern world. And to figure this out, we're not going to be reading from some dusty old textbook. Nope. We get to tap into a really personal, first-hand account from someone who is actually there, HH Bhanu Swami. He met Śrīla Prabhupāda and saw the whole thing start to unfold. This gives us a totally unique on-the-ground perspective. So our story really kicks off with a first impression. For Bhanu Swami, the tiny seed of what would become this global movement was planted during one pivotal meeting in Japan. You know, the thing that immediately struck him about Prabhupada wasn't some kind of flashy charisma. What Bhanu Swami says he felt was this profound seriousness and authenticity. This wasn't a man inventing something new. He was a messenger, a conduit for a tradition that was ancient, and that genuineness, well, it was magnetic. But having an authentic message, that's really just the beginning. Actually building a movement from zero, that's a whole different ballgame. And back in India, Prabhupada's first attempts were met with, well, huge obstacles.
I mean, he was facing this massive gap between his vision and the reality on the ground. On one hand, you have this grand plan for temples all over India, a worldwide spiritual community. And on the other hand, he had no land, no money, and the programs he held were chaotic with almost zero local support. Honestly, it looks completely impossible.
So how in the world did he bridge that gap? It really came down to pure, relentless persistence. He said yes to every single invitation to speak. He wasn't afraid to boldly ask powerful, influential people for help, even though he was rejected over and over again. He started a life membership program when 1,000 rupees was a fortune. And, crucially, he started to fund his vision for India with the support that was just beginning to bubble up in the West. He just would not give up.
And that support from the West, well, it started to explode. This brings us to the 1970s, which was a time of just sudden, almost unbelievable growth. But this created a brand new challenge. How do you keep everyone on the same page when you're growing that fast and communication is, well, painfully slow? Just look at this timeline to see how wild the growth was. At the start of the decade, you've got just a handful of centers, but as his books started getting published more and more, temples just started popping up everywhere, all across North America and Europe. In less than 10 years, boom, a major global presence was reality. Just think about that for a second. There's no internet, no video calls, no email. News traveled by snail mail and maybe a monthly magazine. You've got disciples scattered all over the world, basically working in isolation. What was the glue? What kept the whole thing from just splintering into a dozen different groups? And the answer, according to Bhanu Swami, is as simple as it is profound. It wasn't some complex org chart or a constant stream of memos from headquarters. It was the simple fact that Śrīla Prabhupāda existed. Just his presence on the planet, even from thousands of miles away, was the force that held everything and everyone together. And get this influence was so deep that many of his disciples never even had a one-on-one conversation with him. They might have seen him speak from a distance, maybe once if they were lucky, and yet they stayed completely dedicated, just fueled by the power of his mission and the knowledge that he was the one leading it. Now, that kind of influence doesn't just happen by accident. It comes from a really unique ability to communicate. So let's break down the genius of Prabhupada's teaching method, because it was absolutely key to making ancient wisdom feel so immediate and so personal. He had this very clear four-step process. First, he'd get everyone to chant the original Sanskrit verse, connecting them to that ancient vibration. Then, he'd break it down, word for word, taking all the mystery out of the language. But here's where the magic really happened, steps 3 and 4. This is where he masterfully connected that ancient text to the world his students were actually living in. He wasn't just talking about some abstract, pie-in-the-sky philosophy. No way. In his commentaries on these ancient scriptures, he would talk directly about the big issues of the day. You know, politics, war, world hunger, even environmental problems. He was showing that this wisdom wasn't some relic in a museum. It was a practical guide for right now.
And that is what made his teachings so incredibly powerful. He was bridging a 5,000-year gap between the text and his audience, making these really complex ideas easy to grasp and proving, in real time, that these principles were more relevant than ever.
So, when you boil it all down, what are we left with? Well, in a world that just keeps getting more and more complicated, Prabhupada's legacy is actually one of profound simplicity.
I mean, just look at this comparison. It's pretty striking. We're all dealing with modern challenges, right? Like having an out-of-control mind or being addicted to the next dopamine hit from our phones. Prabhupada was addressing the root of all this with timelessly simple principles. Control the mind by chanting, ground yourself in wisdom by studying scripture, and purify your whole being by taking prasadam, or sanctified food.
And the absolute foundation, the central pillar holding all of this up, is a practice called Nam Sankirtan. It's not some solitary, quiet meditation. It's the shared, congregational chanting of the holy names. This is the bedrock of the whole movement.
And if you had to distill his entire world-changing mission down into just 3 words, this would be it: chant and be happy. It's such a simple instruction for such a profound goal. Not that temporary, fleeting pleasure we're always chasing, but real, eternal, spiritual happiness.
Which really leaves us with a final question to think about. In our own lives, where we're surrounded by more distractions than any other generation in history, what simple, foundational principles could we apply to just cut through all that noise and find a more meaningful, happier way to live? It's definitely something worth considering.